Hello, Jacksonites, and welcome to part 2 of March of the Apes in episode 37 of Super Kaiju Binge. Just rolls right off your tongue. Today is a special episode because this will be my very first Disney movie review, technically, and it's probably going to be the only one. Discounting if I ever do get around to reviewing the Marvel Cinematic Universe in the future. Not likely, though, in my opinion, because I have no interest in that franchise. But yeah, to my knowledge, this is the only monster movie that Disney has ever made in its repertoire of films. To my knowledge, anyway. And I'm not counting like Maleficent's dragon form at the end of Sleeping Beauty or any kind of giant animal really that has been in any other Disney movie. This is specifically a monster movie as far as I'm concerned. Um Hell, the main character is the monster itself, and he's the title character of the film. So it's a monster movie, and it's put out by Disney. It's the only Disney monster movie that has ever been made. Sue me. With the painfully, criminally underrated remake, Disney's Mighty Joe Young from 1998. Yet again, another boring ass gray disc. I hate this, but at least the font is the same as the poster, so that's cool. Yes, indeed. Mighty Joe Young. So, my personal history with Mighty Joe 98, as it's a lot of times called, is not super remarkable. Now, I do talk a lot of shit about Disney as a studio nowadays, and I still do think they are the most evil, greedy, um, money grubby, worst studio in Hollywood today. Um, all that they care about is rebooting and collecting and stealing everything that they can get their hands on and just rebranding it and calling it theirs and saying it's better. I don't like Disney as a studio nowadays. However, when I was a kid, growing up between the ages of 2 and 12, surprisingly, I was a very, very avid Disney watcher. I was a big fan of a lot of Disney's animated movies from regular Disney and as well as Pixar. My favorite era of Disney is the mid 90s to the early 2000s. And same goes for Toy or Pixar, starting with Toy Story and ending around 2008 or 2010 or so. But I think Pixar was definitely at its best during the early days, and Disney, as far as animated movies were concerned, was between the mid 90s and the early 2000s. Like, of course, I like The Lion King and The Lion King 2. Um, Hercules, Hunchback of Notre Dame, Pocahontas, um, Mulan, Tarzan, Toy Story, Toy Story 2, Toy Story 3, The Incredibles, Finding Nemo, um, Monsters Inc., Bugs Life. That's about it all off the top of my head. I used to be a very avid Disney fan when I was younger. And I think that was when Disney as a studio was at its very best. Um, so again, I don't like how Disney is nowadays, but during the mid 90s to the early 2000s, they were just putting out lots of quality stuff. And one of which, of course, was this movie, Mighty Joe 98. So, of course, I owned a lot of Disney VHS tapes as a young one in the early 2000s. And on a lot of those VHS tapes, I would always see the trailer for Mighty Joe Young 1998. But for some reason, even I knew who King Kong was at the time, but for some reason, this movie just never really interested me as a young one. And it just never correlated in my head. Ooh, this looks like a monster movie. Maybe I wouldn't mind checking this out. It wasn't until Jackie Boy from Big Jack Films reviewed Mighty Joe 98 in his I think first season of his Kong reviews when he was I think he was at Universal Studios when he was reviewing a whole bunch of other Kong related movies like King Kong '05, King Kong Lives, and King of the Lost World, but one of which, of course, was Mighty Joe 98. And that's when it just clicked with me. Oh, duh. This is that movie that I saw all over my Disney movies as a young one. Oh, shit. This is a remake? Holy crap. I had no clue. And it was through, oh, Big Jack Films is here. Speak the devil. It was Big Jack Films' review of, of this movie that finally got me curious. At the time, I was working my first job and um I went on Amazon and I discovered that the DVD was like $6. So I was like, just add the cart right there. Don't even need to think about it. So I bought it and it showed up after a couple weeks. I sat down and I watched Mighty Joe 98. First time. Oh, yeah. Don't ever try getting the Blu ray for Mighty Joe 98. It's like a Disney premium exclusive deal or some shit. And it's like 50 fucking bucks. This is a good movie, but it's not worth that kind of money. Just stick with the Disney DVD. As far as I know, it's still like 6 or 7 bucks. Very, very inexpensive. But yeah, I sat down and I watched Mighty Joe 98 and I really liked the movie. And this was, of course, long before I watched the original. I only watched the original Mighty Joe last year. And speaking of that, I think I mentioned this before. It was through Big Jack Films' review of Mighty Joe 98 when I went back and checked out Jackie Boy's first review of Mighty Joe 49. And that's, of course, when I made the connection. Yep, this is definitely a remake. Um, but again, I just didn't get around to seeing Mighty Joe 49 until only last year. But yeah, Mighty Joe 98, it really, really impressed me. I thought it was a damn good. I do call this a monster movie, but at the same time, it's not a strong monster movie for different but also good reasons. This is labeled more as an adventure movie, and that is definitely true. But just as a movie overall, Mighty Joe 98 is painfully underrated. I've only seen a few people talk about this movie, and they generally are hardcore monster movie fans. Yeah, I know. I'll talk about that in just a minute, Jackie Boy. So, outside of big monster movie circles, even amongst like hardcore Disney fans, hell, I'm engaged to one. Although Meadow, she knows of this movie because my mother-in-law is actually a big fan of Mighty Joe 98. She likes a lot of monster movies. Like she liked The Meg, Rampage, Gorillas in the Mist, or she wants to see Gorillas in the Mist, but I'm pretty sure she talked about that. I'm going to talk about that movie in this review too. But yeah, even outside of kaiju fans and hardcore Disney fans, Mighty Joe 98 seems to be kind of a forgotten gem, unfortunately, which is a damn shame. Like I already said, this is a very, very underrated Disney movie. And unfortunately, I think a big reason as to why this movie is so overlooked is because it came out the wrong time. So this movie was released Hold on, let me look at something real quick here. Okay, so of course, this same year, the Roland Emmerich Godzilla movie was released May 20th, 1998. And Mighty Joe was released December 25th, 1998. Damn, really the worst fucking time. During a bad year and the worst month. Like, nobody wants to go see a giant ape movie during Christmas. It was released on Christmas in 1998. Yeah, nobody watched this fucking movie. Yeah, December 25th, 1998. And a big reason why this movie is so overlooked is because it was a major box office bomb. The film cost. Oh, Jackie Boy here is saying it was supposed to come out in the summer of 98, but it got shifted to December because of Godzilla. That is unfortunate because had this movie come out in the summer, I still think it would have underperformed, but it wouldn't have bombed at least. With a production budget of $90 million, this movie managed to make only 50.6 million in its entire box office run. So this movie was a major, major flop, unfortunately. Um and yeah, it's sort of fallen into obscurity over the years, but I think that's a major damn shame. So it's unfortunate that, and it's because of this movie flopping, the original 90s script and plan for Peter Jackson's first King Kong movie was scrapped and pushed back indefinitely. That did allow Peter Jackson to move on, um, to do the Lord of the Rings movies, so maybe it was kind of like a happy accident, but still, it's very unfortunate that this movie bombed hard. Although Jackie Boy here is also too saying that this movie did recoup a fair amount of money on home video, which I would not be surprised in the slightest. Still, though, Mighty Joe 98 is a very overlooked and underappreciated movie, not just in Disney's repertoire, but especially in monster movies. It's also kind of unique because it, again, to my knowledge, is the only monster movie that Disney ever made. Um, and it just so happened to be a remake of a kind of almost forgotten movie for its own time as well. So, yeah. Still, though, this movie does have its fans, and I have seen a fair amount of people say that they like it. Still, though, it is a very underappreciated and overlooked movie. So, with all that being said, yeah, let's get into the plot of Mighty Joe 98. As a child, Jill Young witnesses the death of her mother, primatologist Ruth Young, and the mother of Joe, an infant mountain gorilla, at the hands of poachers led by Andre Strasser, played by Rade Serbedzija, the main villain from Shooter, Jackie Boy, the guy from this movie. Andre Strasser loses his right thumb and trigger finger to Joe after getting them bitten off, swearing revenge. 12 years later, an adult Jill, played by a very young Charlize Theron, has raised Joe, now grown to a massive height of 15 feet and weighing 2,000 pounds. Bullshit. He's probably more like 4,000 pounds, but whatever. As a result, other gorillas will not accept him, and they are both now living in relative peace until a wildlife refuge director, Greg O'Hara, played wonderfully by Bill fucking Paxton. I keep forgetting that Bill is in this movie. Like, fuck. That, this overall movie just screams underrated, in my opinion. Yeah. Game over, man. Game over. I swear, I keep forgetting he's in this movie. Good old Bill Paxton. Greg convinces Jill that they would be safer from poachers if they relocated to the United States. The trio goes to Los Angeles and win the hearts of the refuge staff at the Conservancy, who put Jill in charge of Joe. Jill meets Strasser, who now runs a fraudulent animal preserve in Botswana while secretly selling animal organs on the black market. Piece of fucking garbage. And is eager for revenge after seeing Joe featured on a news report. At first, Jill does not recognize him since his right hand is concealed in his coat pocket. Strasser attempts to convince Jill that Joe would be better off in his wildlife refuge back in Africa. During a gala, Strasser's henchman Garth uses a poacher's noisemaker, a bundle of twine and rope with a bunch of various metal knickknacks that creates a horrible jangling sound, to scare Joe into a frenzy. Joe trashes the gala with the intention of attacking Strasser, but is captured and imprisoned in a concrete bunker. When Jill discovers that Joe may be euthanized, she accepts Strasser's offer. She and the refuge staff smuggle Joe out of a truck, and before their departure, Greg, who, who has fallen in love with Jill, kisses her goodbye. Get this fucking bullshit out of here. Shortly after Jill leaves, the maintenance workers come in with the poacher's noisemaker that they found while cleaning up the gala, making Greg realize Jill and Joe are in danger and he drives after them. On the way to the airport, Jill notices the half glove covering Strasser's missing fingers and recognizes him. She fights Strasser and Garth and then jumps from the truck onto Hollywood Boulevard, leading to several automobile accidents. Joe sees her and tilts the truck over onto its side and flees, wrecking some havoc in the Hollywood city and being chased by helicopters before arriving at the Santa Monica Pier Carnival. Greg finds Jill, who tells him of Strasser's intentions and her history with him. They track Joe to the carnival where he is playfully wrecking havoc. Strasser, determined to prevent Jill from exposing him, arrives and attempts to shoot her, but Garth, appalled at Strasser's ruthlessness, turns against him and shoves the gun away from Jill, causing Strasser to misfire at a spotlight, which starts a fire that quickly spreads throughout the carnival. After knocking Garth unconscious, Strasser attempts to kill Jill Terminator style in person, but Joe sneaks up behind them and throws the evil poacher onto a nearby power line. Unable to grip the wire due to his missing fingers, he falls onto a transformer below and is shocked to death, bzzz, having a very shocking conclusion, leaving only his prosthetic half glove dangling from the cable. I'll be back. Later, Joe attempts to save a child who he had earlier bonded with while en route to the Conservancy from atop the burning Ferris wheel, but the fire burns it down and Joe and the child fall to the ground. Where Joe jumps off of the burning wheel, protecting the boy and knocking himself out. Joe survives the fall, thank fucking God, and awakens, and Jill mentions that they need to raise money to open a reserve for him. The young boy named Jason donates some change to Jill after hearing this, prompting nearby civilians led by a police officer played by fucking Wilford Brimley? Was this before or after he was diagnosed with diabetes? That's funny. Yeah, that's played by. There's a police officer in this movie played by Wilford Brimley. um, yeah, prompting nearby civilians to contribute. Joe is returned to Uganda, where Jill and Greg opened the Joe Young Reserve. Finally free, Joe runs off into the jungle, ending the movie on a very similar, happy, upbeat note that the original movie had. It was diabetes killed the beast. uh, well, before we begin, a word from our sponsor. Diabetes. Fuck you, Jackie boy. Alrighty, so what do I think of this story? Similar to King Kong '05, though not quite as much. This movie's plot is also quite similar to its original movie. It features not the same beats necessarily, but it features a very similar structure. Um, like we see Joe and Jill as youngsters, and then we have a time jump of 12 years to them both being fully grown. Joe protects animals in his habitat from poachers and big game hunters. Um, they are both convinced by an American outsider to move to the U.S. They both have trouble adjusting to the U.S. And then they are Joe specifically is eventually driven to cause uh, destruction and property damage. And then, under the threat of being euthanized, they are both smuggled out of their homes to be taken back home, and they get into various shenanigans along the way, ending with a structure that's caught fire and Joe heroically saving a child's life. I'll talk about that a little later. So, the movie's structure is very similar to the original movie, but a lot of things are changed around, and also I like to think consider them to be modernized. Um, because at the time, showbiz in 1949, showbiz was a big thing. Everyone was opening up nightclubs and galas and big bars to attract tons of people, especially post Great Depression era, to make money. Here, this movie tackles a very controversial and still ongoing problem that is today, which is poaching and uh, animal rights activists, and as well as animal preservation. Um, so yeah, it feels similar, but it's different enough to still be its own thing. But you can, like, if you were to watch Mighty Joe 49 and Mighty Joe 98 back to back, you would see a lot of differences. But I do think that they are different enough to be their own separate movies, which is what a good remake should do. Not like King Kong '05. That is an example of something that could be considered a shot for shot remake and doing that right. This movie is more of a typical example of a remake, paying much homage and respect to its predecessor, but still carving out its own path and making its own name for itself. And I think it does it pitch perfectly, in my opinion. It does feel very Disney-esque at times, especially towards the end and especially with its romance subplot. Typical 90s Disney. But still, it's a very well done plot. It's very enjoyable. It's very fun. It's not the strongest monster movie, in my opinion. Like, if you want to watch this movie to watch it as a monster movie, you might be a little disappointed. It's kind of like Gamera the Brave in that aspect. Now that I think about it, but a more contemporary comparison, I consider this movie to be a family adventure film about a girl and his best friend who's a giant gorilla, or her best friend who's a giant gorilla. It's kind of like Free Willy. It's a family adventure movie, saving a big animal from people who want to cause harm to the big animal. And the movie puts a lot of focus on the friendly bond between the human and his giant best friend, who's an animal. Free monkey, as Jackie Boy here is saying. Yeah, I think it's a bit similar to Free Willy, and that's okay with me. Yeah, I love monster movies, don't get me wrong, but I also like movies like Free Willy. That's a big reason why I also do like Gamera the Brave. So if you take aspects of Gamera the Brave and Free Willy mixed in with a little bit of giant monkey action and turn it into a monster movie, I could dig it. Yeah, and I do dig this movie. This might be my least favorite example of, well, I don't know, because I think both this movie and Gamera the Brave have kind of weak monster action, but actually, no. I think in that aspect, maybe Gamera the Brave is my least favorite. But so yeah, I don't think that this movie is, as a monster movie, all that strong. So yeah, you might be just a tad disappointed if you want to watch this as a monster movie, but just watching this as a family-friendly adventure movie about a boy or girl and their giant best friend who's a giant animal, you'll get a kick out of this movie, as did I. So, I have 9 pros. Also, fair warning, I don't think this will be a super long episode. I don't really know because a lot of my pros here, I don't have that much to say. Um, but just be forewarned. This might be a bit of a short episode. Pro number one is Jill and Greg. Jill, of course, being played by a very young Charlize Theron. I've never been a big fan of Charlize Theron. I don't quite think that she's that great of an actress. And in a lot of movies I've seen her in, she tends to play very unlikable, snobby ass bitches. I don't think she is in real life, at least not to my knowledge, but I've just never, there's something about Charlize Theron that's just never really resonated with me. Um, but hands down, of all movies I've seen Charlize Theron in, this is her best role, in my opinion. She's very believable as Jill. Um, she's very likable. She's very pragmatic. Um, she is just a very likable, simple kind of character. You definitely do buy, I'll talk about this a little later, her bond with Joe. You believe that she loves Joe very much and she's very protective. She's kind of like an older sister to Joe. Um, like how I think Ryan described Jill for the original Mighty Joe Young. She's very much like an older sister to Joe. It's not a loving in a weird way type of relationship. It's very familial. It's a strong familial bond, which I really do like. Uh, Not much to say about her. She's just very likable. She's very well acted and well written. Jill is just very, very good. Yeah, I'll probably say she's a little more likable than Jill from the original Mighty Joe. Nothing bad against Jill in the original, but I just think Charlize Theron threw a lot more of a good performance in this movie than the actress who, well, what was her name? Terry Moore did for the original Jill. Nothing against Terry Moore, though. And then we have Greg, played by fucking Bill Paxton. The fuck? By the way, I can't believe I forgot to mention this. This movie was directed by Ron Underwood, the same guy who 8 years prior directed the original Tremors. What an odd correlation. And then I think a couple years later, he went on to direct The Adventures of Pluto Nash, which I do like that movie quite a bit, actually. even though it's stupid Eddie Murphy fun. It's entertaining. But yeah, Greg, played by Bill Paxton, massive, massive improvement over the original Greg from Mighty Joe 49. He's very likable. He's very charismatic. He's very fun and enjoyable to watch. There's not really any of that goofy, over the top Bill Paxton-ness in this movie. Bill plays the role of Greg pretty straightforward and not really serious, but he's just giving a good performance. It's a perfect balance of being a little campy and not really campy, but like a little smart assy at times. But he's definitely taking this role a lot more seriously, but he's also having a little bit of fun with it. Greg is also very charismatic and pragmatic character as well. He's very knowledgeable. He's not like a super, obviously, he's not playing this type of character, not a super bulked up, buff, badass, heavyweight kind of dude. But he has been an animal preservationist, I think, for a long time. He knows a lot about the big flora and fauna of Africa, and he airs this kind of like quiet authority to him. Like he knows his stuff, and he's very knowledgeable, and he knows how to think on his feet. And I find that to be very likable about him. And he also knows how to get along with a lot of people. And he also has this aura that just kind of makes you trust him, as Jill learns to trust him pretty quickly. And their bond, I joke, but I don't necessarily think that their romance is forced, not like it is in the original Mighty Joe or especially the original King Kong. You do get the sense that Greg and Jill do develop feelings for each other as the movie goes on at a natural rate. A lot of that does stem from their mutual concern and desire to protect Joe. Um, and what I also like is that they very easily could have just made Greg out to be a very unlikable, just in it for the money type of guy. Um, but no, he actually does legitimately care about Joe, especially over the course of the movie. At first, he just wants to protect a very rare animal, but as the movie goes on, his bond with Joe grows stronger as the film goes on. Not nearly as strong as Jill, but by the end of the movie, he does care about Joe quite a bit. And it's very believable and very heartwarming. Um, yeah, it's cool. Greg's a great guy. He's a great protagonist, and he feels like the a very natural partner, both romantically, but also just as animal preservationists. Jill and Greg go together like bread and butter. They're totally made for each other. And speaking of which, pro number two is Mighty Joe Young himself. Not talking about the special effects quite yet. I really want to because they're really good. But Joe as a character in this movie is phenomenal. Like I said in the original Mighty Joe, he's adorable. He is absolutely adorable. He's a total big, playful, softy bundle of fun. But he also strikes a balance between being a softy and being a 2,000-pound giant, 15-foot tall badass gorilla. But he's not a monster necessarily. He's just an animal, a very big one. Um, he is a lot of fun to watch on screen. His bond with Jill and Greg as well is very, very believable. You absolutely buy Jill and Joe as having grown up together in Africa, and they have learned how to watch each other's back. Like Jill protects Joe, and whenever Jill is in trouble, Joe comes to her rescue. It's very believable and it's very likable and heartwarming. And Joe has a 360 3D realized personality. Like he's very protective over the ones he cares about, and he also is very protective over both animals and young ones. You get the sense that he is just a very, very strongly, fiercely protective, loving bundle of fur. He's both badass and a sight to behold, but also cute, lovable, and adorable at the same time. Joe is absolutely amazing in this movie. No, never mind. Excuse me. Yeah, not much to say about Joe. He's just kind of a simple character, but and he is a character without a shadow of a doubt. It's also a little hard to talk about him without talking about the special effects, but Joe is great. If you want to watch this movie just to watch Mighty Joe himself, you won't be disappointed. And he's got plenty of screen time um, throughout this movie, so you won't be disappointed there. Pro number three is the music done by Mr. James Horner. Oh God, he's dead. I thought that was James Newton Howard. So yeah, James Horner did the music for this movie, and it's phenomenal. It's probably one of James Horner's most underrated scores. Oh wow, this movie got an Academy Award nomination for Best Visual Effects. Oh, but it didn't win it. Oh, you fuckers! I can't get into that yet. Um, shit, I lost track. Oh yeah, so yeah, the music. This has to do with another pro, so I'm going to talk about this right now. Pro number four. This is going to sound odd. Is the African feel. And this does have a lot to do with the music. The music in this movie, for a lot of it, it sounds extremely African in a good way. There's a lot of deep jungle bongo drums. Uh, there's a lot of there's a lot of African choir singing in this movie, a little reminiscent of the Lion King, fitting since this is a Disney movie. Um, this is a weird pro, and I don't have much to say about it, but the African feel, it's just very strong, kind of like with how I was talking about with Planet Terror and it having that Texan vibe. It's just a very pleasant vibe to experience when watching this movie. Like you feel like you're in Texas watching Planet Terror. With this movie, when they're in Africa, it looks very genuine. You feel like you're in the African jungle and you're amongst African people. Like with I'm going to talk about this in a little bit with Gorillas in the Mist, released 10 years prior. It's just very well done. It's a very warm and heartwarming and just pleasant experience watching this movie take place in Africa. And I don't think this movie was shot in Africa, but mm, I don't think, or I don't know. It doesn't say here. Yeah, it doesn't say. You fuckers. I know those are weird pros, but to like the African feel, but that's just what I feel. But back to the music. Yeah, the music is very good. It's heartwarming and uplifting when it needs to be. It's a little more foreboding and dark when this movie is trying to be darker. It's also very whimsical and fantastical, just showing off the big, giant, awesome sight of Mighty Joe Young. Overall, yeah, the music is very, very solid. And the main theme, I don't know what the song is called, but the main theme that Jill sings to Joe to calm him down. It's an African song. It's a very good song, and it's sung during Jill's mother's funeral by her African friends. That's at its best when it's sung like that. It's really good. Yeah, the music in this movie is great. Enough said. Pro number 5 is the anti-poaching messages slash Strasser himself. I don't have that much to say about Strasser. He's just a very typical evil, greedy piece of shit poacher. Um, Very simple villain, but he does his job. But I feel that this movie strongly encourages anti-poaching and animal rights preservation. So poaching is one of the biggest forms of crime on planet Earth. I think it's the fourth highest profited form of crime in the world. I think it makes like 15 to 18 billion dollars a year. Various species of animals all over the world are killed just for selling off parts of them on the black market for millions of dollars. Like um bears are hunted down for their gallbladders. Cheetahs are hunted down for their skin. Elephants are hunted for their tusks. Rhinos are hunted for their horns. Um, Hippos are hunted. Crocodiles and alligators are hunted for their skin. Beavers and otters are hunted for their fur. Bears are also hunted for their fur. Hundreds of, maybe even thousands of animal species all over the world are poached for some kind of various um, animal part to be sold for millions of dollars. And one of the most disgusting and infuriating animals that is poached is gorillas. Gorillas are poached for their babies to be sold to zoos, but they're also poached for their hands and their heads. I don't know what the heads are used for, but for some fucking reason, gorillas' hands are poached to be used as ashtrays. Why? Use a rock. It's free. And it doesn't require you having to hunt down a fucking gorilla to use a fucking ashtray. Gorillas can fuck you the fuck up. And especially you come across a gorilla as big as Joe, you will be royally fucked the fuck up. And how they're hunted too is absolutely disgusting. Gorillas are hunted by being speared and run down until they're exhausted, and then poachers will hack them apart with machetes, hack their hands and their heads off. What the fuck? Poaching is disgusting. I think sometimes poachers are more disgusting than human traffickers and drug dealers, in my opinion. Poachers are pieces of shit. And I do feel that this movie took a lot of inspiration from Gorillas in the Mist. A lot of the poaching themes in this movie feel extremely similar to stuff that was talked about in Gorillas in the Mist. For those who don't know, Gorillas in the Mist was a movie released in 1988 starring Sigourney Weaver as Diane Fossey, a real life animal preservation and animal rights activist who spent almost 20 years in the Rwandan jungle protecting a tribe of mountain gorillas from poachers. Unfortunately, she was murdered, and the actual person who killed her to this day has never been caught. But a lot of stuff that's shown in Gorillas in the Mist feels very similar to a lot of stuff showcased here. So I would not be surprised if they took some inspiration from Gorillas in the Mist. The jungle that is shot for this movie, where we find Joe, looks very similar to the jungle that's shot in Gorillas in the Mist. And Joe, of course, is a giant gorilla that's being hunted by poachers purely just for profit. and it's disgusting. Um, Now, I'm not saying that it's a pro like incorporating poaching in this movie because I support poaching. I just think that it's a message that is not shoved down your throat, but it is very prominently shown. They talk a lot about the fact that Joe is such a rare animal and they're fighting so hard to keep him alive because so many people all over the world just want to hunt him down and kill him just so they can sell off his body parts piece by piece for millions of dollars. It's disgusting. Um, so it's a good message and theme, in my opinion. Um, and Strasser is a very typical poacher. He's a total money hungry, greedy, slimy piece of shit of a man. So, as a villain, he's effective in that aspect. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But yeah, the anti poaching messages I love in this movie. Watch this paired with Gorillas in the Mist, and you will be almost wanting to jump out the door and move to Africa and hunt down people who try to poach animals. It's very inspiring in a good way. Pro number 6 is the little homages that is sprinkled throughout this movie. Well, with the plot itself being very similar to its original movie, I do feel that the filmmakers were trying to do their own thing, but they were borrowing elements from the original as a way to pay respects to its predecessor, not just to steal something and call it theirs and call it good. I feel the filmmakers were being very respectful to this movie's source material. But the little homage here that everybody likes to point out, including Jackie Boy, there's a scene where a older couple see Jill show up in a beautiful white dress to show off Jill at the or Joe at the gala. The woman looks at her and says, "She reminds me of somebody." And then presumably her husband talks to her and says, "Reminds me of you when when you and I first met." That is Ray Harryhausen and Terry Moore. Terry Moore was the actress who played Jill in the original Mighty Joe Young. And of course, Ray Harryhausen was the legendary stop motion effects pioneer who animated Joe in the original Mighty Joe Young with supervision by Willis O'Brien. But that is cool. That's a cool, cute cameo. And you definitely get the feel that the filmmakers knew exactly what they were doing by having those two be here. They were paying their respects to the original and also effectively passing the torch in a very respectful way. Love it. Pro number 7. This movie is, I would say, fairly dark, in my opinion. It's not like, well, I mean, I don't know. It might be considered one of the darkest Disney movies ever made because there's some kind of heavy shit that's showcased in this movie. Like the movie starts with Jill's mother being gunned down by a poacher. Joe's mother gets gunned down by a poacher. And then, as an act of revenge, Joe bites off Strasser's fucking fingers. And you see the bloody cloth covered stump of his hand afterwards. And then Strasser is always talking about how he wants to hunt down both Joe and Jill for revenge for his fingers getting bitten off. And they want to slice apart Joe and sell him off piece by piece. And at the end of the movie, he literally is indulging in his serial killer tendencies and hunting down Jill like a fucking Terminator. This movie is kind of dark in my opinion, but it's not like overly dark in a forced way, and it also doesn't clash with the rest of the movie. It's dark when it needs to be dark, and then it's whimsical and campy when it needs to be. It's a very good balance in my opinion, but I do appreciate that. It's not very often when Disney movies get super dark. The only other examples I could think of, Cinderella 3, believe it or not, of all examples. But I definitely think the darkest Disney movie ever made, in my opinion, is Hunchback of Notre Dame, because it literally begins with Frollo killing Quasimodo's mother. Great. Damn, that's a good movie and a good villain. I had a little trouble with the fireplace. Find the gypsy girl. Um, yeah, I like the dark feel of this movie. It's great. Pro number 8 is the decent action scenes in this movie. There's not a lot, kind of unfortunately, and when they are on screen, they're kind of short. They're actually mostly just chase scenes. There's a couple rampages that Joe goes on when he destroys the gala. That's kind of a fun scene. But when Joe breaks out, when Jill discovers who Strasser is, when he breaks out and goes on a little rampage in Chinatown, then the Santa Monica Pier, it's fun seeing a giant gorilla go through a busy highway and climb buildings. But some of that's kind of taken away when you realize that he's just being playful. Although some of it is kind of funny. Another aspect that I should have talked about with Joe's personality, he has a little bit of a sense of humor, which is kind of amusing. When when Joe first discovers Greg trying to track him down and like collect a blood sample and record his sounds, he picks him up by his leg, and then right as Joe is about to fuck him up even more, uh, Jill shows up and says, "Joe, drop him." And Greg lands right on his head. He took drop him, literally. Um, but the funniest scene with Joe, Joe is on a rampage through Chinatown. He bumps into a car and its alarm goes off, and it startles him and he's confused. So he's like, "What the hell?" So he smashes the front hood in and it keeps going and the alarm gets louder. So then he smashes the trunk in and it's still going off. So he's like, "Fine." So he turns around, stands up, then looks behind him real quick and he fucking sits on the car. And like the car alarm's getting very warbled and warped at this point. And then as it's still going and starting to die out, Joe grabs one end and like just bends it in half even more. And then when the alarm finally dies, he just goes like like a satisfied grunt, as the subtitles call it. What really made me crack up was when he like went to sit on it and he like looked at it again real quick. Crack. um Yeah, I like the action scene. Or yeah, I like the action scenes. Like the little bit of humor. It again, it even more so goes to showcase Joe's personality, um, which is great. Um, and the end scene when Joe saves Jason from the giant Ferris wheel, it's a little thrilling and entertaining. A lot of that though is kind of taken away like after the fact when you know that Joe survives. It just feels a little too drawn out and given some fake tension, but still it's very heartwarming and uplifting to see Joe, this 2,000 pound giant gorilla, climb a burning Ferris wheel to save a little boy. It's sweet and heartwarming. But yeah, the action scenes are fairly fun. The chase scenes are entertaining enough. It's fun to see Joe jump and run and outsmart the helicopters and cars. Yeah, it's fun. But the ninth and final pro and the biggest highlight of this movie is the amazing practical special effects are absolutely fucking phenomenal. Rick Baker, returning from King Kong 76, did the special effects for this movie, and they're fucking amazing. This movie received an Academy Award nomination. It didn't win it for Best Visual Effects, but it lost to What was it? Losing to What Dreams May Come. Never heard of that movie. Which is a shame. Totally think this movie should have won it. But so Joe himself was played by a guy named John Alexander, I believe. Yeah, John Alexander. And the design of Joe and the effects were done by Rick Baker, of course. Vern Troyer played Baby Joe Young, guy who played Mini-Me in Austin Powers. Um, but yeah, the effects are phenomenal. 90% of the movie, Joe is portrayed as a man in a suit. And they're fucking flawless. There's a lot of composite effects of showing regular people on screen with Joe. When Joe is stationary, it's a giant 15-foot tall animatronic gorilla, and it's amazing. But when Joe is walking around, it's a guy in a regular suit, but composited with some slight miniature sets, but also other people around showcasing how huge he is. But they're flawless. I don't see any problems with the composite shots or the animatronics. And the animatronics for Joe's face are pitch perfect. They are as good as they absolutely could be for the time in showcasing Joe's facial expressions. When he's angry, you can tell. When he's confused or depressed, you can tell. When he's happy, you can tell. Uh, which is, I appreciate that a lot because apes use a lot of facial expressions. It's nice to see that the filmmakers did their best to incorporate, because Joe is just a giant gorilla. He, of course, would too use a lot of facial expressions. And it gives you even more insight to Joe's personality, uh, and it makes you bond, or yeah, it makes you believe even more so the bond between Jill and Joe, because Joe himself is very expressive and his body language is very easy to read. You can just, even though Joe doesn't talk, whenever Joe and Jill are hanging out, you can absolutely tell what's going on between the two, and it's fantastic. And John Alexander, of course, does a really good job playing Joe. He's cute and lovable when the movie needs him to be, but he's also menacing and badass when the movie needs him to be. Um, Great. The effects in this movie are absolutely flawless. There is also a few scenes where Joe is CGI, namely the chase scene when Greg first discovers Joe throughout the African savannas. When they're chasing after him in their jeeps, Joe is a CGI model, but I think the CGI model looks just fine. They're somewhat limited. They only used CG when they absolutely needed to. This was still during the time when Hollywood had that balance and mentality, when they were like, okay, we want to have both. We still want to have a lot of practical effects, but we only want to use CG either as a supplementary tool or a last ditch effort tool. And it's greatly, greatly appreciated. And even more so highlights the amazing practical effects by Rick Baker. I don't know if I want to say that this is Rick Baker's best work, because America Werewolf in London is still pretty amazing. It's a toss up between either this or America Werewolf in London. You be the pick. But the effects here are as good as they could be for 1998, and they're absolutely fucking phenomenal. Some of the best giant monster effects, especially for the 90s, ever. Because 90s is kind of, well, no, it wasn't. But America wise, 90s was kind of sparse for monster movies. But yeah, effects are amazing. So with all that being said, I have no cons. I'm getting that out of the way right now. But I have four nitpicks. and most of them are kind of simple. Nitpick number one is that I do think I stated earlier that it's fine for the most part, but I do think Jill and Greg's romance, it's believable, but at the same time, it's just a bit corny at times because it's so like typical of like late 90s movies. It kind of whenever Jill and Greg are just hanging out and going on a semi date, and honestly kind of reminds me of My Big Fat Greek Wedding at times. um it's just like so like corny. Oh, that hurts. Corny, cheesy rom-com typical bullshit. Like a scene out of Sex in the City or some shit. Um it's believable, but at the same time still it's just a bit corny. They don't focus on it that much though. They focus on it just enough to develop and solidify Jill and Greg's bond, which is nice. It's just a little corny. Nitpick number two, the ending of this movie is very Disney corny, as I call it. It feels very much just like a typical Disney happy ending. Like nobody dies, the villain gets its comeuppance, and the movie ends on a super happy-go-lucky, uplifting note. It's very, very Disney, as Ryan said in our big ranking video last year. Um, Not a bad thing, especially if you are a fan of those type of Disney happy endings. And also, I like it when giant ape movies end with the ape not dying. I can appreciate it, but still, it's just a little corny. And as I said earlier, the ending does feel a little drawn out and hokey on rewatches because you know that Joe survives. It just feels a bit too drawn out. Um, because you're just like, "Oh, I already know what happened, so we can just kind of get this done and over with already." Nitpick number three is Strasser is a very simple villain. He doesn't have that much screen time. And whenever he is on screen, he's very one note. All he's talking about is the next animal that he's going to kill, being a slimy douchebag, and then ogling, excuse me, Joe for his next super big giant paycheck. Um, he's slimy and he's enjoyable as a villain and he's effective as a villain, but he's a very simple one note villain. Not very much to him. There didn't need to be that much to him because it's really hard to feel sympathetic for a piece of shit poacher. Still, though, he's just a bit too simple. Shit. And my last nitpick is kind of the lack of monster action. Now, like I said, this isn't exactly a typical monster movie. It's not made to be a typical monster movie. It's a big family-friendly giant animal adventure movie, and it's effective as one of those. But I think even the original Mighty Joe Young had somewhat better action than this. The chase scenes are entertaining, but they're kind of brief. And especially later on in the movie, the thrill and entertainment factor of watching a giant gorilla go through a city, it's kind of taken away when all of the comedic effect is added in, which it is funny and it's cute to watch Joe go through a haunted mansion or Joe go through a hall of mirrors and see his warped, distorted reflection. It's cute and funny and all that. But as a monster movie, the monster action in this movie is just a little lacking for my taste. Again, I know what this movie's trying to be. Still, though, I could have gone for just a little bit more. Um, but that's all I have to say. I'm a little longer than I thought it would be, but still. Um, Final thoughts. Mighty Joe Young 1998 is a painfully underrated Disney movie. I wouldn't quite say that it's one of my favorite Disney movies. It's not in my top 10, at least. Definitely in my top 20. It's very underrated, though. It's extremely, unfortunately, overlooked and very underappreciated. I appreciate that it has its fans, but I still say that this movie deserves a lot more love. It's a very loving, very respectful, very passionate remake for an underrated classic. Um, it just overall is a very fun, uplifting, heartwarming, entertaining movie. I will be giving this a solid 8 out of 10. Those four nitpicks kind of hold it back for me, but still, very, very good movie, and I highly recommend it. So, with all that being said, post your comments down below. Let me know what you think. Hit the like button and hit the subscribe button and share this video with your friends. Look forward to next week's episode. I've been talking a lot about rampages with this movie. Is that a clue? And I will see you guys in the next video. And remember, if you go over to Africa and you see a giant gorilla with her best friend walking around, just leave him alone. Say hello, then just leave him alone. And I will see you guys in the next video.